I think we're live. Hello and welcome to another exciting Bold Explorer reading. It is another week. It's Monday, the 17th of August 2020. And I've got a new book. Those of you watching, I've got a new book. I thought we'd just wade through this afternoon. I don't know if you can see how much of a brick this is. I'm only joking, of course. We will carry on with our wisdom of the fields in a moment, but I just wanted to show you this. This was waiting for me when I came back from a walk with the lovely Julia today. It is called Agriculture, the Science and Practice of British Farming, 1945. Before all this modern monoculture, it's about mixed farming and the whole process of it. But it's a beautiful textbook for students of agriculture that would have been in the good old days. I'm just showing a picture of it here. Some of the illustrations and things of the people working the fields in the good old fashioned way, and some of the equipment that was being used in the 1940s. There are some amazing pictures, and actually it's a wonderful textbook. I have to say, I am thrilled to spend just a little bit of time reading, and it talks about everything from the soil, the what is it called? The constitution and the formation of soil, into the selection of seed, and then individual plants and their uses and how to plant them, management for hay and silage, livestock improvement, starch, dual purpose breeds, beef production, flock management, and so on and so on. Absolutely great big tome of a book, and it looks lovely. Something to read late at night, you know, when you can't sleep. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. I read it as a reference. I'm terrible, ladies and gentlemen. I read it as a reference when I was reading a book that I'm reading at the moment, and the quote from it, and I love the quote. And then when I read a quote from another book, I end up looking to see what the book was, and before you know it, I've bought the bloody thing. If it's a second-hand book and it's not too expensive, a beautiful tome. Good afternoon to the lovely Julia, to John F, to Audrey Forbes Hamilton, to Ed Loud, to Turbo Stream, to Lee Lawson, to Linda Kane. Which is marvellous. Hello, took me a while to find the live today, says Lee. Sorry about that. Ed, looks like you'll have that book all finished over a cup of tea. Yeah, nice short, you know, the total practice of farming up to 1945. Before the governments got involved and ruined everything. We will continue with this incredible book, The Wisdom of the Fields by H.J. Massingham. I've got another couple of his on order, actually, because they've been referenced in the books I'm reading. By the way, for those that didn't watch me yesterday, I'm using a different camera, so hopefully the quality is a little better, sharper, and more colour in the image, which, not that you're particularly keen to look at this old fool in front of the lens, but if you do happen to glance up, then hopefully you see me in more luscious detail than before. Hazel B, good afternoon. Linda Kane, just driven past your abode, Richard. What do you think about the painting on the hoardings? I hate it. Is that why, sorry to diverge just slightly before we get going, ladies and gentlemen, I thought they were putting in cycle lanes all around where I live, just for the benefit of those that people don't know, have gone up these very peculiar orange stalks. Is the only way to describe them. They are like flowerless stalks. There are some cones, traffic cones, but there are these stalks, orange stalks, about a metre or so high. And I don't know what they're doing, but where we've had two carriageways coming out of Worthing, they've decided to knock one carriageway and put these stalks up. And I thought they were putting in, because of COVID and the amount of people who've taken to bicycles, more cycle lanes. I don't know if that's true, but it seems that instead what's happened is a whole load of graffiti artists have been let loose on some hoarding, which is on a building site that was nicely painted blue and inoffensive, and now has a lot of graffiti art on it, which looks like we're in some back streets of New York somewhere, which actually puts in my mind, and I have no problem with people wanting to express themselves, and there's a proper place, I think, for it. But I find that sort of art, I find it stressful to look at. I find it evokes stress in me, so much so that when I came out today, and the lovely Julie will know, that I actually arrived in a foul mood. Lee Lawson says it's a pop-up cycle lane. I hope they're not going to make that because permanent, because the traffic is now appalling. And, you know, the idea is to get people on bikes. I understand that less pollution. And, of course, what you're doing is you're setting up traffic jams. So there's more pollution. So anybody walking or on bikes are cycling through this lots of pollution as people are revving their engines, start, stop, round mini roundabouts. It's an absolute stupid idea. And any council who think that they're, you know, clever and doing a good thing really need their head examined. But there we are. What do you do? Waste of money, in my opinion, says Lee Lawson. Yes, nobody's consulted us. At least I wasn't consulted in this area whether that's something that I want. And I certainly don't want... I have enough traffic in the area. I don't want more traffic. Just outside my door, stop, start, you know. It may be all right at 11 o'clock, but you get there at 7:30 till 9:30 and see what, you know, the smog that's going to be there. Anyway, they are putting in cycle lanes. If there's anyone in Brighton where cyclists still complaining that few that bother, they won't like the traffic fumes. Yes, exactly. Well, I do occasionally... I mean, Turbo Stream says he won't mention he's a cyclist. Well, I'm a cyclist on occasion, but I just find this whole thing farcical. Once people go back to work, it'll just go back to normal. There won't be as many people back on the bikes. It's a fad. It is a fad. You know, when it's raining and the winter comes, you watch how many people are on their bikes. There'll only be the dedicated ones who would have been on their bikes anyway. Anyway, we better get on. I do apologise. We've wasted 7 minutes of your time and mine. But there we are. People now will start talking about that. I'm going to continue from where I left off. And I just got to refresh my mind because it's been a couple of days now. We're talking about the last of the stone mills, the miller. Oh yes, he was talking about the miller, and the mills that have been taken down, if I remember. So this is a continuation. I hope you can pick this up from where we were. Here is an extract from the letter of a millstone dresser himself. Talking of mills, by the way, Julia and I had a sort of light-hearted shufti around Woods Mill, which is the one of the Sussex Wildlife Trusts. I think their headquarters are there. And Woods Mill, referencing a mill, we saw a millstone set in the ground. Anyway, here's an extract from a letter from a millstone dresser himself. It's taken a war to reveal to every country-loving individual the vital part the local watermill is still capable of achieving. Every factory nowadays displays a notice exhorting operatives to save power. Yet, sad to mention that when we take a walk in the country, many a ghost is encountered in the shape of a ruined mill with water power running to waste. By the way of introducing myself, I am a millstone dresser, having put in a lifetime into mills up and down the country and having tended and dressed all kinds of stone, including the almost forgotten French Burr wheat stone, on which our ancestors made good wholesome flour which supplied the stamina needed by the island race. After dismissing roller mill flour as a fraud, he continues in his letter, my father, who owned a country mill, often remarked of English wheat that there was none to compare with it. Look, for instance, at the time it takes. Look, for instance, at the time it takes to mature. I can just remember seeing him making flour of wheat gleaned from the harvest field by the labourers' wives, and he being content to take the bran as payment, the farmers having to pay per sack. Another thing, while on the subject, anyone who can remember the process can also call to mind the smell and taste awakened. The very atmosphere was laden with the savoury, appetising flavour. But you never feel tempted at the packing end of a modern flour mill. No, I bet you don't. I'm still employed in the milling trade, but I regret to say not on millstone work, which called for skill, ranking, almost on a level with some of the characters you picture. Something of the extraordinary versatility of the country craftsman was revealed in the 18-page letter of this millstone dresser. He gave me an elaborate description of the geological differences between the granite French burstone and the gritstone peak from Derbyshire, mainly used for grinding grist for cattle, and of the correspondingly different techniques for dressing them. He enlarged upon what the blacksmith had to do in drawing out and tempering the steel blade of the thrift or dressing tool as though he were one himself. He gave a detailed account of how he used to lift the runner and the bedstone from their position in order to dress the furrows, and I felt I might have been reading a description of how the trilithons of Stonehenge were moved. He wrote like an expert about timber work of the mill and the water pigments used in order to expose the grinding face of the stones. He had a great respect for the age of many of the stones that he had worked, well in their prime in Lord Nelson's time, and having been a dresser in Dorset, gave the Thomas Hardy as well as the map names for the places that he had worked and loved. He made it clear that to be a good dresser it was necessary to understand the structure, the carpeting and the engineering of the watermill as a whole. His father, who had been delighted to think that his son had adopted his love of the occupation, had not only been the owner of a mill, but a cabinet maker who, throughout his life, over 90 years, had retained a love of woodwork, and had himself put in a new overshot water wheel and geared it to steam power. Our former craftsman, in fact, knew, without the aid of books or research, everything there was to be known about their own particular countrysides. From the country miller to the country baker, Mr. Middleton of Padbury, near Buckingham, with whom I took tea in the autumn of 1944. He is a traditional craftsman, and Padbury is a village mentioned in the Domesday Book. It still retains many substantial cottages of discreet half-timbering, brick and colour wash, with thatched roofs of chevroned ridgeboards in the style of Norfolk reed thatching, strung at wide intervals along the minor road. This, together with good stewardship of All Souls College, has saved Padbury from being swamped by the mean jerry-built stuff that has been the fate of so many villages. In his village, Mr. Middleton takes so proper a pride that he is by way of becoming its local historian, tracing its fortunes and changes from the earliest times. He showed me an enclosure award map more than 6 feet high, the account book of Hillersdon Manor in 1658, with an entry recording a 30 shillings tithe payment to one Samuel Pepys, a kinsman, presumably, of the diarist, and the copybook of his grandfather, who was also a baker. But these antiquarian pursuits were more of a recreation. They were significant for his work. In the baking room was a large brick oven, the bricks of whose sides were white with heat and age, and they were 80 years old, and floor tiles which had still and are locally made by hand at Chalfont St. Peter in the same county. To hold the heat, they are made of an extremely soft clay which can only be manipulated by hand. At the side of this handsome oven was a small furnace fed by beech faggots and coal, whose damper, by means of the draught, throws out a tongue of flame over the oven's tiled floor. The only technical difference from the modern steam heater is that it has to be refuelled with each batch of loaves or cakes, though less and less so after the first and second. There was also a small electric dough mixer worked off a belt. These details are not trivial. On the contrary, the whole baking room was a modern version of the cottage brick oven, improving the best of the past without violently breaking the continuity between past and present. Before a batch was put in, the oven was swept with a scuttle instead of old style with a mop. What was still more important, this development in contradistinction from progress still left ample latitude for craftsmanship in baking. The bakehouse was a vivid illustration of what is maintained throughout the book, that craftsmanship is the only force in the world to control and utilise the machine, instead of the machine controlling the worker and robbing him of his skill and pleasure in his work. Consequently, I found the conversation with Mr. Middleton very interesting. He is not only a craftsman, but, what is more rarer even than this, a young one. I sought his views on whole grain bread, and he had a penetrating knowledge of breads and bread making that older men may envy. These views were exactly what I expected from such a man. He had no illusions about the white loaf, but though he cured himself of an illness with authentic bread, he had to bake germless flour for lack of all but 6 customers for the real. We both asked each other, why do people prefer white bread, which is not bread at all but a facade? Why sacrifice the stomach to the eye, especially, he said, as they like black cakes? He told me how his father, also a baker, had to bake the new flour, first ground on porcelain rollers on the Hungarian model in about 1870, because white bread had been adopted on the next round but his. But how? First the squire took it, then the parson, and then the whole village. But why? For this was in the days before the tin opener. Perhaps it was that when taste in beauty went in the last century, taste in food followed. At any rate, the young craftsman's taste in both was uncorrupted. He knew food values as well as all the rights of way in his parish and all the details of the poor remnants of the country crafts that still exist in his village. He was a craftsman, and the craftsman can always be trusted to know the difference between the true and the false. And perhaps he was a craftsman, because he was a craftsman, respect for the past went hand in hand with enlightenment in the present and for the future. Just pause there for a second. High Wycombe A40 went from 2 lanes to 1 lane plus giant shrubbery pots in the middle, especially good as our A&E maternity unit's closed and it's 10 miles to Stoke Mandeville now. Oh, thanks Ben Reed for that. Hello Richard, says Ben Beaumont. How healthy can it be cycling among the fumes and pollution? Love some of your videos, by the way. Thank you, Beaumont. That's very kind of you. I may have said Ben, did I? I didn't mean to. Hazel said, got that going on too. No consultation. It's going to mean more traffic coming down my road. Yes. I hate graffiti of any description. It's all vandalism to me, says Audrey Forbes. Boris should be on a bike with Biden. cares? That's true. Nigel says the new cycle lanes are supposed to attract people away from their cars and onto their bikes over many months, so the traffic is reduced and also the fumes. Yes, I'd like to see that. I wonder how many people travelling from Horsham to Worthing, or from Brighton to Worthing, or from Chichester to Worthing will decide that 20 miles, 2 hours on a bike is what they're going to do to work, and another 2 hours back in all weathers. I don't think they will be doing it, to be honest with you. I think for local traffic and local stuff, that will be all right. But people, they commute to where their work is, and not always the work is nearby. Roland Millward says, good afternoon, Vobes fans. Good afternoon, Roland. James Poulton says, cycled for only 40 years, nearly 69, but averaged 120 miles a week and same weight as when I was 21. Well, you need to eat more. I jest, of course. Well done for you, sir. Ed Loud says, well done, James. I'm not even the same weight I was last month. Blimey. Yes, certainly is, says Lee Lawson. This must be interesting. Oh, yes, interesting because Lee Lawson, by the way, has an amazing bread oven in her house. It used to be a bakery. And so I don't know how much of that related to your oven, but that presumably there were things that made you think, at least I hope. Graham Cass says, James over any racing to do the other one about the cycling. Okay, we'll carry on. This is part 2 of chapter 3. I think we're on chapter 3, isn't it? Chapter 3. No, chapter 4. This is chapter 4. I didn't realise. Cobbett always insisted upon a balanced intercourse between town and country in the mutuality of needs. The canals, before the railways, partially paralysed them, and the industrial towns had outgrown and paralysed their rural neighbours, acted as the intermediaries. It's funny when you start reading and you look at the word and you suddenly realise words that you can, when you don't think about them, pronounce, you're fine with, and then when you're trying to read them, intermediaries, you suddenly struggle because you're looking at all the letters. And now I've lost the essence of what I was saying. I'm sorry about that. The canals, before the railways, partially paralysed them, and the industrial towns had outgrown and paralysed their rural neighbours, acted as the intermediaries, I've done it again, intermediaries in the exchange of local needs. The traffickers on them brought country produce as well as took coal. Are we talking about the canal still? And urban manufacturers. Hence the bargemen reveal vestiges of the same interplay between art and business, which was the mark of all their rural craftsmanship. One of the purest and most unalloyed pleasures of my life is to receive, from time to time, additions to my collection of bygones of husbandry and rural industries. They come to me from all quarters. They are always unexpected, and I rarely know the senders. The pleasure of the object itself has been enhanced by the manner of its coming. Yes, I can well believe that, because people do send me stuff from time to time from all over, and sometimes it may just be a tiny little thing, and it's a it's a pleasure that somebody somewhere has thought of you and sent it to you, and it becomes it's embroiled with more than just what the original thing is. It is incredible. One such was brought to me in the spring of 1944. It is a richly ornamental stool made and painted by a boat builder of our canals, Herbert Tooley of Banbury, the very same person that we read about, if you were with me then, that LTC wrote about when Cressy, his narrow boat, was painted, and he waited weeks as he was doing it up for Henry Tooley of Banbury to paint it, because he was in Banbury. I don't know whether you remember that, but he was one of the last, and it's about the same sort of time, which is curious. The stool has no legs, and the stool has no legs, and the two sides that support it are themselves wide curved panels of wood, offering nearly as broad a surface as the paintbrush as the top surface, while the strips of wood along the two open sides are likewise painted. The design itself is an arrangement of roses and their leaves painted in yellow, light green, a dark lustrous red, maroon, and a mauvey pink, blue and cream white on the dark green background. And the surface, the panelled sides, and the strips at right angles to them are each painted with a different pattern. The gaiety, the liveliness, the richness and sureness of these paintings on a stool, not more than about 18 inches high, light up the whole room, while the paints used are of the freshest and clearest, no muddlingness anywhere. You get something of the same felicity of sheer colour in Bruegel's rich paintings of the homeliest country scenes. La Motion, for instance, I'm sure I've murdered that, and in the 18th century, Chinoiserie, and I know I've not pronounced that correctly. There is a charming border of flowing lines round the top surface of this glowing little stool, which is not unlike Chinese calligraphy. The curved lines are in harmony with the rounded shapes of the roses, as is the dancing border with the vivacity of colouring. The boatman who made and painted this joyous thing is not known to the art schools. He does not call himself an artist, but a boat builder. I should imagine it's extremely doubtful whether he has so much heard of the word art. How, then, did he come to paint these exquisite pictures on my stool, and what is more, in a series of formal designs? The answer is that he did so because he was a canal boat builder, which will not be an answer at all, intelligible to the art critic, but it is perfectly intelligible to any countryman with memory. This unknown painter of the canal boat trade, one of the very last of his kind, paints like a master because it has been the tradition of his particular trade to do so. Before, that is to say, the canals were sabotaged by the railways, before the individual owners of the boats were bought out by the companies. It is no exaggeration to say that every small owner along the waterways was a painter every bit as good as he who has conferred so brilliant a gift upon me. We know that this is true because the rose design and the castle design are traditional. As well as roses, these small owners used to paint the doors of their barges with romantic castles of the gayest colouring. The castle and the rose were conventions belonging to the boatman alone, and for a man not to paint castles and roses on his floating home was to be less than a man. Some months after receiving this stall, I spent the night on one of those boats moored in the Gloucester-Birmingham Canal. The view across the rolling country to a long-drawn, richly moulded horizon of the Aberley Hills to the west and along the indented line of the Clees, as far as the shaggy brow of the Wyre Forest to the north, and in the middle distance the needle spire of Bromsgrove Church magnetised the broken country and gave it orderliness of its own. The foreground was various with orchard slopes. Now, beautifully, the vessel itself, Viking-like with its high bows and long lines, responded to the plenitude and diversity of the landscape. For everywhere, on the walls, on the cabin's door, on the dipper, on the watering can standing on the forecastle, and everywhere the boat was adorned in this folk art. The big watering can was crowded with the rose design of every inch of it, even on the hinge of the curved handle. The castle motif was painted both as a mural in the cabin and on the back of a tray. It was the oddest thing to see a French or Dutch chateau complete with flanking towers and pepper-pot turrets rising gigantic and Rocco above furry trees girdling a lake, and a cottage with a blue roof embosomed on them. What did the old canal men know about the French chateau? Did perhaps the Dutch boatmen hand them on to our men? This, at any rate, was the form their fancy took, faithful from generation to generation. Nothing could seem more prosaic than horse-pulling a barge-like boat from town to town, carrying coals or flour. But the romance of the long winding reaches, the gliding countryside, the open air, the free life, and, above all, the romance of ownership was theirs, and they expressed the goodness of these things by their folk art, by their castles and their roses. These barges are, in fact, related to Cleopatra's barge on the Cydnus, and both descend, no doubt, from the painted Nile ships of Queen Hatshepsut or something, and her forerunners. Mr. Frederick Burgess gives a few rare examples of the oculus still painted on Sicilian boats, not silicon, Sicilian boats, that's my mistake, and the conventionalised here by a star or diamond. He also suggests that the elaborate designs of landscape and foliation owe much to Staffordshire pottery. Again, my friend L.T.C. Rolt, who has intimate knowledge of canal life, boats and boatmen, tells me that the interior layout of the boat cabin is identical with that of the Reading type of gypsy wagon. He conjectures the influence of the land nomad upon the water nomad was derived from gypsy casual labour on canal construction, when the first, the Bridgewater Canal, was cut and the mosses was cut across the mosses near Manchester, at the time open heathland and much frequented by gypsies. He supports this contention by the fact that boat decoration is confined to the canals. The navigable river boatman has no such connection with the Diddecoys and never painted his boats. But whatever the origins of painting boats on the canals, this folk art itself is as old as the seafaring man. It was once common to all mankind in every land and every clime, varying only according to the strength and self-expression of national characteristics, and particularly healthy and vigorous and widely diffused in our own people. The destruction of this universal art sense in mankind has only been made possible because a man's joy in his ordinary work has become a thing of the past. The lock keeper near the barge where I spent the night told my friend, who owns it, that in the old days lock gates were changed in a day. Now we take a week. Men worked from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m, often, though, having to walk 3 miles to the lock. On a summer's morning they would arrive at 3 or 4 a.m. But then, he said, everyone took an interest. Now they all think of this. Now all they think of is how much in the pocket at the end of the week. It was out of that joy in work that ordinary men made objects like this richly decorated stool of mine, which communicates its joyousness to me and lights up the whole room. Well, that's incredible, and there you go. I bet it was Rolt that sent him the stool, because he talks about it. Maybe the stool that he wrote about in the book. That would be amazing. Hatshepsut was an intriguing female pharaoh. Thank you very much. I can't pronounce her name. I'm sorry about that. I drove past that chateau last week, says TurboStream. Did you indeed? Is it in the middle of Birmingham by any chance? We're on chapter 5 now. Shall we progress? Yes, I think we will. Just quickly having a look at some more of the thing. Only one used for white bread, thick cut toasted butter and marmalade. Oh, only one use for it. Yes, I guess that's true. Since I've started making my own bread, I haven't gone back. I still make my own bread. I made a loaf yesterday, and it's lovely, absolutely wonderful. Hatshepsut, or something like that. Anyway, thank you. This is chapter 5, Workman of the Small Town. This is a quote to begin with by Ecclesiasticus, whoever he might be, or Ecclesiasticus. I can't pronounce it. It's probably Latin, is it? All these trust to their lands, and everyone is wise in his work. Without these cannot a city be inhabited, and they shall not dwell where they will, and go up and down. They will maintain the state of the world, and all their desire is in the work of their craft. I can't even begin. Ecclesiasticus. Is it Ecclesiasticus? Is that his name? Who knows? Between the Wrekin, which is in Shropshire, and the long double ridge of Wenlock Edge, which is also in Shropshire, lies a patch of primeval England whose history is more curious and significant than are any of the tidal tales of border warfare a score of miles away. Okay. Here, from Coalport on the east to the Cistercian Abbey of Bilwas, west of it, the Severn has ploughed a narrow furrow through the coal measures and runs swift, straight and shallow through a gorge of lofty cliff clothed on the north bank with a forest. That, I think, is what they call now the Iron Gorge. The two mountains, the one a range of Paleozoic limestone, whose northeastern end abuts on the river, the other a sandstone Hog's Back, which is the central boss of the whole county, are the enormous gateposts of the region. The great river slides by the forest precipice of its southern bank, while the bristly spine of Wenlock limestone has dark woods that climb even higher. The solitary grandeur of the Wrekin Mount looks across the maze of dingles slipping deviously down to the gorge. This almost savage majesty, together with the confused and convulsive geology of the region, so dramatises the scene that Bishop Percy's reputed discovery of the relics of English poetry at Shifnal, on the plateau above the George, seems more than an accident. The wild Severn Gorge seems to cradle their passionate rhymes. Bit poetic there, isn't it? Something happened at this one spot that changed the face of the world. The Industrial Revolution began in the Severn Gorge. If it began elsewhere at much the same early period, all traces of that gigantic and demoralising accession of power have been effaced by later developments. But not here. The revolution began here, but it stopped dead. Ironbridge today is still, more or less, as it was in the 19th century. It was one of the first settlements of a revolution which was to obliterate local variety and individuality over the world. Well, that is an interesting and different perspective that I've ever heard about what's it called? Ironbridge. Yeah, Ironbridge Gorge. Yet it's true. You had all those old. So I know what he's leading up to. Up until the Industrial Revolution and ironworks and mechanical stuff, you had all this old craft, and then mechanisation came in, threw people off the land. I'm sure that's where he's going. And as a result of all of that, people went into towns. Let's see if I am in any way right. If you're enjoying the reading, do give me a thumbs up, by the way. That would be very helpful. The wooded cliff off the north bank is what it was when Derby's great iron bridge was building in 1779, as it was when the Iron Age Godels named the Severn. Had that steep and conical woodland been felled, the cliff would have slipped and slid into the river. The south bank, with its irregular terraces and brick and sandstone houses strewn as though dropped out of a sack along a narrow wharfage and over the face of the Gibraltar-like rock, presents a surprising spectacle. Progress stopped progressing immediately after its first tremendous bound. Progress became obsolete and derelict. There is a blast furnace not far away and steelworks at Madeley. Now, the blast furnace I did a video in, by the way, but neither really dominate the scene, and it's probable that the brick of many of the houses came from the Madeley clay pits. They can be called neither beautiful nor ugly. They are transitional between one and the other, between the new diffused uniformity and the old local traditional variations. The transition occurred on this very spot, but it froze. So we see it today as we see a drop of water in a cave falling 1,000,000 years ago. Here are derelict kilns with bushes sprouting through their brick courses. Slag tips pimple the uplands, which are moulded by nature's green fingers into the landscape. Relics of a few beam engines here and there remind us of how steam power, which is local and durable, was pushed out by the internal combustion engine. Boulton and Watt's beam engine became the works of Wilkinson, the ironmaster, and Ironbridge became so because the smelting of coke out of the shallow carboniferous deposits of the gorge replaced by smelting by wood, probably from the oak of the wire forest, ramparting Bewdley on the south. Iron had also entered the soul of Wilkinson, that he was even, I gather, buried in an iron coffin. But it was the local ironstone that made Ironbridge, not the imported pig iron that now makes steel. Wilkinson and Darby of the Ironbridge were still local craftsmen who jumped from wood to coke, but not out of the land where they were born and worked. Coal and ironstone had been used in Coalbrookdale since the 20th century, and the art of coal and ironstone had been used. Coal and ironstone had been used in Coalbrookdale since the 12th century. No, sorry, not the 20th. Since the 12th century, and the art of casting iron by smelting the ore in coke furnaces and pouring into moulds remained an art, and so became a wedge within the Industrial Revolution. This is the whole point of what we see, and we see it supremely in the iron bridge that spans the river to this day. In fact, it can be seen twice over. In one of the houses of Ironbridge, there is a magnificent series of coloured prints showing the iron bridge as it was when first built in 1779. In one of these pack horses, standing by the bridge while the river barges are being loaded. In one of these, it's the way it's written, the paintings, pack horses stand by the bridge while the river barges are being loaded, and men cross planks between wheelbarrows with a pole at each end. With what dignity the 100-foot span of the great bridge, with its soaring and dipping arch, the flanking arches and the abutments of stone sheeted with iron, catches itself and focuses the grandeur of the river gorge itself. At twilight, sometime the steam moves under the iron bridge in the plates. I read that wrong, sorry. Getting to that point where I'm now cocking up the reading, apologise. At twilight, sometimes the stream moves under the iron bridge in plates of beaten gold, embossed with silver and overarched by this black rainbow. The work of man is not to be belittled by the superb gesture of nature, whose river had carved out the cliffs. It spans them, and by the interplay between man and nature is a symbolic expression of man's place in nature. He manipulates and he manages nature, but all is still in harmony between them. The break is not yet. Man, armed by the revolution, has yet to confront nature in the ambition of its quest. If the beauty of the bridge has been the chance of the artist in the prints, its utility and craftsmanship appear when you walk down the footpath of the bank to where the arches take off from their buttresses. It is not conceivable that cast iron work on this titanic scale could be executed today. The smiths of Vulcan might have bridged the Styx with it, so solidly has it been spanned years. The smiths of Vulcan might have bridged the Styx with it, so solidly has it spanned the years from the dead beginnings of the revolution to the living present. As you follow the line of the arch, the meaning of the whole gorge can be deciphered as clearly as the inscription cast upon the iron at the apex, which it does say cast by, what's his face who does it, Derby. It is that English craftsmanship. It is that English craftsmanship survived the revolution in its initial stages and even gained strength from it. Its roots held firm. The continuity was not severed. The pious faculty of mastership had not yet surrendered to the acquisitive passion that put man in bondage to his own discovery of cheap power. The goodness of the work itself was still dominant. The glory of that continuity makes the heart leap as the arches leap across the river. In the majestic ruins of the Cluniac Abbey at Much Wenlock, tucked under the edge's northern tip, is an early 12th century lavabo carved with figures and gospel scenes. They may have been chiselled as you watched, so fresh and new they look. The stone was Wenlock limestone, the primary Silurian limestone than which none is harder. Cotswold Oolithic limestone is as a lightly pressed to a hard-pressed cheese compared with it. The later masons preferred the softer Triassic limestones abundant in Shropshire, which have now peeled and scaled like the bark of a plane tree. The lavabo, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, and the bridge are fellows in a brilliance of man's handling of the most dour and intractable of natural materials. The bridge is the last powerful token of an English craftsmanship that has lasted up to it without a break from prehistoric times. A few miles away there is a great marvel as the iron bridge itself, namely the survival of that same manual power over iron as created the bridge. Northeast of the Severn Gorge, towards the Staffordshire border, stands on the plateau the little market town of Shifnal, not far from the Boscobel Manor and the oak that saved Charles after Worcester. Here work the chain makers of the old established firm Edge & Sons. It is a fact that if a monk of the Cistercian Abbey of Bill was, at the foot of the gorge, had walked in among these chain makers at the head of the gorge, there would have been hardly a sign to tell his glance at the sweating and hammering smiths and strikers that he had arrived 7 centuries too late. But if he turned up 10 years to come, he would find nothing to remind him of home. A new electric plant for flash welding has been recently evolved, which bids fair to make chain makers of Shifnal as... Oh, I see. A new electric plant for flash welding has been recently involved, which bids fair to make the chain makers of Shifnal as obsolete as the Cistercian monk. I myself have seen them, only just in time, but I took away with me an imperishable memory of the power of craftsmanship to stand up to the huge developments of the revolution that has destroyed it. The Coalport China, whose workshops Turner set up from Worcester in 1772, have now gone, and I could only buy it in an antique shop at Shrewsbury. The figured clay pipes of Broseley are soon to follow, and I obtained almost the last of them made. The wool of Shrewsbury and the rugs of Church Stretton, the pillow lace and woollens of Bridge North, and the hair weaving of Market Drayton, the bells and wood carvings of Chelmarsh, and the smithying of Ludlow, all these, and the honourable self-help of England with them, are a tale of the past. Not quite yet the chain-making at Shifnal. The workshops are not at all like the romantic pictures of ye old English smithy. They are just open sheds with corrugated iron roofs. There are two of those, one for the heavier chains to anchor battleships and liners, the other for lighter chains of many sizes that lie coiled up tortuous on the floor like hibernacalcium of the reticulated snakes. The hibernacalcium of reticulated, I'm guessing that's the skin, is it? That's the skin that's come off a snake. Hibernacalcium of reticulated snakes. Along the whole length of the heavy chain shed is arranged a series of hearths, each with its own hooded furnace, water canister, sandbox, anvil, tongs, swage, sledge, and other hammers. 2 or 3 men, and sometimes boys, are welding and striking each hearth. The smith hauls the next length of the clanking chain out of the blaze, or as the old term is, blizzy, and strikers, welding their sledges, go at the fiery metal with a rhythmic fury, a swing from the torso and a play of muscles glorious to behold. The vapour of the fire waseth his flesh, and he fighteth with the heat of the furnace. The noise of the hammer and the anvil is ever in his ears, and his eyes look still upon the pattern of the thing that he maketh. He setteth his mind to finish his work, and watcheth to polish it perfectly. I don't know what that quote is from, but it is a quote nonetheless. We just got a page and a half to finish this section, so I'll just plough on if that's all right. I was so spellbound by the roar of the flames, the flying sparks, the surge of brawny shoulders, the belling of the anvil, the perfect timing, the astounding speed and urgency of the whole operation, that I failed to time it. But these specialised blacksmiths could not have taken longer than 2 minutes to forge each separate link. This includes shaping with the swage and attaching the chain and all, the links of 1.25 inches or under being joined by bending in the ends, the thicker ones by hammering in the sides. The force of the fire and the weight of precisely adjusted and directed strength turn the ponderable iron into a malleable dough, while the hammers work their will on the anvil like bobbins on a lace pillow. The power is conferred by style. It is the style that forges another link in the chain, not strength, its instrument. The style is the man, and this is man's work. Least resistance works this miracle of weaving an iron bar into a necklace, not the pounding of brute force. the poise, the correlation, the utter precision of every motion from the swing to blow was a kind of scanison, and each link completed was a metrical close. Airness of flame was matched by fluidity of muscle. The coordinated strategy of the lightning brief process gave every pounce and punch of the whirring hammers a kind of delicacy. A man's job, this play of thew and sinew, but also of the artist. What will they do with these men when their anchorage to their hearth is pulled up? The dole of the assembly line is for them. Then they will cease to be men, for what makes a man is his home and a craft. Lose them and he becomes a mobile unit of a gang. What is education for but to make men of boys and women of girls? There were several boy strikers tolling and sweating at the shaping of iron. When their fathers hear no more the music of metal, it will be the state school only for them. The author of Cleanliness and Godliness wrote to me the other day and told me the story of the Barusha people's reply when they were told that children in England were made to go to school between the ages of 5 and 14. They said, "But that is the time when they ought to be learning things." There was an old man in this communal workshop, but we must be careful with the word communal. What is meant here and ought to mean always and everywhere is the number of independent workshops all working together. And he told me that he'd been a chainmaker for 32 years. 32 years of bending iron. In winter, sometimes his chest was on the equator and his back was on the polar regions. Always rivers of sweat coursed down his front. But he spoke as though he were pleased about it. At labour so gigantic and furious, these men of iron work only from 6:30 to 11:30, with a break of 15 minutes, and consuming in all these 5 hours... 6:30 in the morning to 11:30 at night. It's not 11:30 in the afternoon. And with a break of 15 minutes, and consuming in all these 5... Oh, maybe it is. It is only from 6:30 to 11:30 in the day. Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. At labour so gigantic and furious, these men of iron work only, from 6:30 to 11:30 with a break of 15 minutes, and consuming in all these 5 hours 12 pints of beer supplied up to the war by the firm. The chainmakers of Shifnal probably came originally from Ironbridge, though the firm is from Walport. Like their fellows of Cradley Heath, they began as home workers at their own forges, but the rapid rise of industrialism at the expense of agriculture forced them from their home, first as part and then full-time workers. Yet they escaped the fate of the nailers in being first sweated and then ruined because of their high degree of skill exempted them from the competition of the machine. Each smith contracts with his own contracts with his firm to make chains at so much a foot, and also with his own strikers. So though these smiths are now working for a single firm under the wage system, they retain distant traces of the traditional economy of the master-apprentice self-contained independent workshop. They have brought their pre-industrial past to a present where industrialism is showing marked signs of decay. They represent a stage long superseded elsewhere when craftsmanship for a fleeting period partnered industrialism. Brief indeed, for the core of industrialism is the factory, and the labour of a factory made efficient and up-to-date is a property-less and skill-less proletariat of men, that is to say, made as like as may be to the machines they serve. So he doesn't think much of mechanisation, does he? Thank you for indulging me to let me get to the end of that bit. I hope you enjoyed that. It was quite hard to read, and I I tripped a bit on some of the long words. But he does write beautifully, and I wish I could read it beautifully. But anyway, amazing to witness that period of time when men were still imbued, is that the right word? Imbued with the skills of their trade, but very sad to see them having to put down whatever their craft was, and, as he puts it there, to become machine minders, that a machine does the work for them, and quicker and more efficiently, but not necessarily as skillfully or as beautifully or indeed as satisfyingly for those doing the work. Very difficult indeed. So a lot of lamenting, I think, going on there from H.J. Massingham. But it is fascinating, I think, to understand what we have lost and what we had built up over thousands of years, and so quickly, so quickly we've lost it. And it sort of feeds into my other thing at the moment about food and the supermarkets, and how just simple cooking seems to be something that a lot of people just do not really know, and don't know what to do with the ingredients. It's such a shame. Let's just quickly look at some of the before we go. I will finish off. Ironbridge Gorge, where the Industrial Revolution started, by Abraham Darby. That's right. I can recommend the Blist Hill Victorian Village as a place to visit. Yeah, I've been there. It's very interesting. They have a inclined plane, which was a system to move narrowboats, tugboats, I think, carrying coal and other materials up this inclined plane to another canal. So it's like a lock, but instead of going in the lock and the water lifts you up, it used to get pulled up this slope, a bit like a cable car. Fascinating. I don't think it's in working order anymore. There was another one just round the corner which I featured in my video. Can't remember the name of the place. It'll come to me after I've done it. But now it's just a hill, and you can walk there, and there's no reference to it at all, which is a shame. Deep breathe, carry on reading, dear sir. Thank you so much, Julia. There is a nice pork pie shop by the bridge. You can see on his face if the bridge... You can see his face in the bridge if you know where to look. Oh yes, that's right. That's been pointed out to me. You have to look in a certain way. We don't really know that it's actually his face, but it does appear to be a face. I saw a chainmaker at the Black Country Museum. The description is most descriptive of what I saw. Oh, brilliant. Well, there you go. Anyway, thank you very much. I can recommend Blist Hill Victorian Village, not far away. Yes, well done, Les. Thank you so much for joining me. There'll be a Vogue show later tonight, and we've got some interesting videos that have been sent in to show, which will be marvellous. But for now, that's it. So whilst you go and do whatever you do, from this lovely little thin book, I'm going to... Look at Architecture, the Science and Practice of British Farming, 8th edition. There we go. If you want a textbook, it won't focus, unfortunately, because it's fixed focus. But if you want a textbook, there it is. I'll just read that before I cook my dinner. Take care. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.